Hey, this is Rahul from RWR.com, and how's it going, everyone? For those of you who are first time on my channel, I own a 2013 KTM Duke 390 and I've reviewed motorcycles like the Suzuki Hayabusa and the BMW S1000RR on this channel. But today I feel a special sort of excitement because today we are going to ride the Bajaj Dominar, and this motorcycle begins a new era for Indian performance biking, and more importantly it fills up a nice gap which existed in the market for a very long time. This review is done in collaboration with Ace Biker, the highwayman who has done the city riding and also some of the bad roads testing. He rides on a Suzuki Hayabusa and motovlogs. His channel link is in the description, so do check him out. And now back to the review. Last year I was riding the Avenger on the same highway, and though I was very impressed by that motorcycle, I wanted Bajaj to come up with something bigger, and they seem to have delivered just that in a year's time. If you have watched other reviews of the Bajaj Dominar, you may have heard of the term power cruiser. When you think of a cruiser, you think about ample torque, a lower seat height along with a lower center of gravity, and a longer wheelbase. But when you think about a naked bike, you think about power, handling, great braking, and a 50-50 sort of weight distribution. Combine the characteristics of both and you get something called a power cruiser. When a sport bike manufacturer like Ducati went in to create a cruiser, they ended up creating the Diavel. In my review, I will mostly focus on whether this motorcycle can live up to the power cruiser tag or not. The motorcycle has a very upright, almost cruiser-like sitting position, but the handlebars are not raised like a traditional cruiser. They're street-style handlebars, which means they make the motorcycle very easy to flick through lanes at high speed and provide a lot of feedback and feel. I really love these handlebars. They are not too raised and neither too low, and the width of the handlebar is also perfect according to me. Definitely a lot better than raised clip-on handlebars that Bajaj used to have on the Pulsar AS200 and the RS200. It also has a lot of free space on the bars, so you can mount a GPS and a phone mount and still have room for mounting an action camera like I've done on the left of the Dominar 400. For those of you who are wondering, yes, this is an SJ6 Legend. It's around 10,000 rupees and it is a proper motovlogging camera with external mic support. So if any of you budding motovloggers are watching this video, you can check out the camera and the link is in the description. Anyways, before I digress any further, let's get back to the review. The saddle on the Dominar is wide, and though it's a soft and comfortable saddle, it's not like the plush sofa seat type that causes back pain in long tours. This one is firm enough so that you don't sink into the seat. There's a lot of room to move around in the saddle, and also if you want to ride aggressively, you have the option to tuck in very easily. Even the pillion seat is wide and comfortable, so two-up touring is not going to be a problem. Foot pegs are somewhat balanced. They're not sporty, they're not like completely forward like a cruiser, so it's easy to ride it aggressively, but when you want to relax, you can simply put up your legs and your foot pegs will be in a position that gives you hours and hours of comfortable riding on the highway. Before I bore you more about the ergonomics, let's just get right into the performance. I've been listening to your voice on Facebook and there's been a lot of talk about this being a slow bike. This basically is from the notion that it's 10 bhp lesser than the peak power of the KTM Duke 390, and it's also significantly heavier. Of course, the power to weight ratio doesn't seem like in the Dominar's favor, but then again, take a look at the power to weight ratio of the Ninja 300 and suddenly it doesn't look so bad now, does it? The power that this motorcycle is delivering is in the low and mid-range, and that makes up for the loss in the top end. Remember, as a power cruiser, I'm expecting riding at around 120 kilometers per hour, and at that speed in the 6th gear, the engine feels just so relaxed and stress-free. Also, no spec sheet can explain how smoothly the power comes on and how the power builds up as you twist the throttle in a very predictable and linear pattern. Whereas the Duke has a sudden explosion of power after 5500 RPM, the Dominar doesn't surprise you anywhere in the rev range. And though it takes the thrill away, the Dominar is an easy bike to ride, and I felt confident right from the first time I twisted the throttle. I remember that the Pulsar AS150 and the RS200 both had a throttle response delay. After twisting the throttle, the power came in a tad late, and I was never really a fan of that. Glad to see that they're fixed on the Dominar. It's instantaneous. I don't want to exaggerate, but the way this motorcycle produces a strong torque and builds the power progressively, it kind of reminds me of the Kawasaki Z1000. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it is as powerful as the Z1000, but it definitely follows the same engine mapping and the same pattern of building power, which is a great feat for Bajaj engineers, I feel. If you regularly ride on smooth highways, you know that the touring speeds are usually around 80 to 120 km per hour, depending upon the rider and the road conditions. And the Dominar engine in this rev range feels the best, especially if you are in the 6th gear. This is the rev range at around 5,500 RPM, and it's a low revving bike. It doesn't go all the way up to 10,000 or something like that. It peaks at around 9,500. That's the rev limit. I think instead of going for the peak power at higher revs and pleasing the top speed fanatic crowd, they've gone for something which is more mature and usable, and which will attract the serious bikers who do long distance touring on this bike. See, if you're having a 150cc bike, most likely if it's a Bajaj AX 150, it also does 120 km per hour, and you can really pin the throttle in its 5th gear and it will do that. But the way of doing 120 on this motorcycle in a very more relaxed way, when your engine's not screaming at the end of its rev range, it's relaxed, it's building power sweetly, you feel the torque, you feel more confident. These things cannot be put into words until you experience the motorcycle. That is sometimes when people buy bigger bikes, like bigger displacement bikes, and they're riding the highway at around 120 km per hour speed, and you can say that I can do that on my much smaller motorcycle, but trust me, the feeling is not the same. It would be very nice if Bajaj could give highway test drives instead of city test drives for this bike. I generally don't cover this segment, but so many of your questions have come to me and I wish to address it in this segment. Apart from the comfortable ergonomics, the bike has a slipper clutch which is very light and easy to operate. Imagine having to ride through bumper to bumper traffic and you won't feel any pain on the left hand. The 6-speed gearbox is also very smooth and reminds me of Japanese bikes. And it's a very usable suspension setup. The front suspension of the motorcycle is relatively hard to maintain composure of the bike while cornering or doing a fast flick on the highway, but the rear is set up soft and it gobbles up the bumps. On the way back, we might encounter some bad patches on the highway, and we can see how it performs there. Another thing to the addition is the full LED headlights. I was riding in it in a dark alley right after the launch, and the headlights provided an illumination level that I've never seen on an Indian stock bike. It's amazing how they have managed to provide all of these features and added bits in this minimum price tag. The bike also gets a 13-liter fuel tank capacity, and I'm expecting a mileage of around 28 km to 29 km on the highway. The range should be around 360 km, which is decent enough. I mean, you have to refuel every 300 km by keeping the last 2 liters in the tank as a precautionary measure, and even if you ride 300 km at a stretch, it's still a long distance to go without a single stop. On my Duke 390, I usually refuel every 200 km or so. When I'm riding a motorcycle, usually I can tell which gear I'm on, but on this bike I seem to be losing track of it. And the reason behind is that even in higher gears you have a good amount of torque, and again, they seem to have widened the power band. That means if you're on the highway and suddenly there's some sort of traffic, like you're stuck behind trucks, you can actually slow down and then pull ahead without downshifting due to the extra torque available to you in the high gears. It may not sound like much, but if you're riding all day, having to shift less definitely helps. The mirrors are also pretty functional, and I can monitor what's going on behind me without looking at my own elbows. I've already stated that it's a very easy bike to ride. The bike is extremely flickable in the city, and even lane changing in higher speeds on the highway feels pretty easy. There is no roll from the rigid chassis, and the front feels very sure-footed and gives the feedback that I've always trying to find out of naked motorcycles. I'm also a big fan of the weight distribution, and the filtering in traffic is pretty easy. I haven't taken this bike to twisties, so it's not possible for me to comment on that department as of yet, but hey, the story moves forward and I'll definitely get back to this bike for another test. So why not hit that subscribe button and wait for me to get back to the saddle of this motorcycle again, and maybe we'll take it to some twisties and have some fun. Moving on to the brakes and tires. When you make a motorcycle fast, you would definitely need a lot of stopping power. Especially if the motorcycle is heavier, it becomes even more important. Bajaj hasn't tried to save any money on the brakes. It gets a 320mm single disc up front and the rear is a 230mm disc. The manufacturer of the braking system is Bajaj, which supplies the brakes for many Bajaj motorcycles as well as the KTM Duke 390, and I've really learned to trust the progressive and sure-footed braking feel from this brand. The bike has a perimeter frame which has a more of a 50-50 sort of weight distribution, so the rear brakes can also be used for some additional stopping power combined with the front. While I was riding, a goat came into the highway and I had to drop speed very fast, and honestly no better testing for the brakes than sudden panic braking. The motorcycle performed really well and I didn't feel that the ABS was activated. I managed it with progressive braking itself. There is a safety net of dual channel ABS that is optional. I stress on the word dual channel because unlike the ABS on the RS200, which was only there for the front wheel, this time the ABS works on both the wheels, and if you're planning to buy one, I strongly recommend you go for the ABS version. Trust me, it saves lives. The tires are as wide as the Duke 200 and 390 and it gets revs from MRF. We have had some issues in the past from the Duke 200 owners about these tires, and mainly it has been about the wet grip and lean angle stability, but on the braking area these tires provided enough friction to slow down the motorcycle quickly. And I expect MRF's new soft compound masseters coming for this bike within the next 6 months or so. Remember, the price tag on the motorcycle would have increased with the usage of better tires, so Bajaj took a decision with keeping the majority of the users in mind who would be fine with these tires. But as I said before, if you're a finicky guy like me, you can easily get a different set of tires. The front of this bike gets a 43mm telescopic suspension, but it's not an upside down suspension like the KTM Duke series. They're set up relatively hard and this makes the bike easy to control, and the feedback through them was very accurate, and I really loved the stability and rigidity it offered overall riding conditions. Also, going over the bad sections of the road, even at high speeds, the bike seems to glide over it. I didn't feel much even on the speed breakers. The bike has good ground clearance and it kind of reminded me of the suspension setup of the Mojo, though I would say that Mojo felt kind of not connecting with the corners, and leaning with this motorcycle was much easier than that of the Mojo. I've seen a lot of disappointment over the top speed figures on the social media, and honestly, after riding this bike, 162 km per hour speedo indicated. Bajaj's official claim was somewhere around 148 km per hour true top speed. I think it's good enough. For a power cruiser on an Indian highway, I'm not looking for much from it. Another thing I want to stress out is these tires, the revs are rated for 180 km per hour top speed, and manufacturers try to keep the top speed a little bit safer limit below the tire ratings, so that even when the tire's old, you are still safe if you're speeding on it, to attract all the youngsters who really don't care about anything else apart from the top speed. They've given this bike a nice wide power band and a very nice torque figure, which I honestly think a lot of youngsters do not understand the importance of this, but really I'm impressed, Bajaj, that you have gone for something more substantial than just pleasing the crowd. As you know, looks are subjective, and when I'm looking at the Dominar, it's not an all-new groundbreaking design. It follows the lines of the Bajaj Pulsar 200 NS, which I honestly think was the best looking Pulsar. You can call it a Pulsar 200 NS on steroids. The fuel tank is huge, and that, along with the headlight cluster, takes the most of the attention of the bike. The little console on the tank is a nifty touch. Overall, this motorcycle has road presence and looks like a big bike. Bajaj also claims a new high-quality 3-layer paint on it. To my eyes, it looks really good and shiny. There are 3 color options, but my vote goes for the white one as it really makes the bike look big and elegant at the same time. Honestly, I've seen a few other reviews and it seems everyone is so excited. They're not talking about the negatives of this motorcycle at all, but as a complete reviewer, my job is to cover everything about a motorcycle, good and bad. But before we get into it, I would like to say that most of it is nitpicking, as it was really hard to find any faults with this motorcycle. First of all, there was a few highway corners where I kept the throttle pinned and I leaned slightly. The rear of the bike seemed to slide off the line just a tiny bit, and since the tires are about 200 kilometers old during this testing, this shouldn't be happening. To be fair, I was over 150 kilometers per hour in one of those lanes, so most riders may not experience this. Still, this could be happening due to 2 reasons. Either it's due to the softer suspension on the rear, or it's due to the tires. I've had a discussion with the highwayman about this and he wasn't too impressed with the tires as well. I think the softer compound masseters we tested from MRF a few weekends ago on the track would have been much better choice to handle the torque of this motorcycle. Another thing that did bother me was the weight. 182 kgs of curb weight definitely makes the bike quite heavy, but thanks to the low end torque, you don't really feel it bogging down the performance of the motorcycles in the lower RPM, but a lighter weight would have made it faster and given it better acceleration. Though I understand that when cost cutting is in process, a few heavy alloys of metal are brought up, as lighter alloys that are used for major weight reductions really drive up the costs. So it's a good decision from Bajaj to balance it out. I really wanted to adjust the rear suspension and test this bike to find out more about its cornering stability, but on this test we couldn't do it. Maybe on the next one we'll play around with it and we can explore further. There have been a few queries about vibrations on this motorcycle, and well, honestly I couldn't feel much vibrations through most of the rev range, but when I was in a higher gear and somehow had to slow down without shifting, I was riding in a very low rev at around 2,500 to 3,500 RPM, and at that point there was clear vibrations through the bars and the foot pegs. Now I wear these thick Dainese leather gloves and mild vibrations usually do not filter through my hand, and feet are also clad in these TR Course Out boots from Dainese, so vibrations filtering through these thick riding gears did concern me. But the moment I went over 3,500 RPM, the vibrations completely disappeared and the motorcycle had the smoothness, which I have nothing to complain about. I don't think it's a deal breaker. For the rev range when most of the riders will be using it, it doesn't really matter. This being a naked bike, there'll always be a wind blast problem, especially if you're riding all day. Some naked bikes still have some sort of aerodynamic channeling, but on this one I really felt whacked by the headwinds. Now I do wear a very aerodynamic leather suit which reduces wind blast, but even that couldn't save me this time. I really want Bajaj to come up with a windshield as an accessory for this bike, because I think that will make living life on the highway much easier. We always have to remember that the sitting position on this motorcycle is very upright, and that does increase the wind pressure on the rider. Nothing that a tall touring windscreen can't fix, so if I bought this bike, that would be the first thing I'll upgrade. And of course a pair of OGO saddlebags will be my only other modification before I hit the highway for a long tour. Overall, the Bajaj Dominar performed way over my expectations, but I don't expect you to blindly take my word for it. Test drives for this bike is available at your local dealership, and if you have already ridden it, do leave your feedback in the comments down below and also read what other riders are saying about it. For me, I am sad to let this motorcycle go, so I will request for another road test, and that time we will compare it with other motorcycles like the Mahindra Mojo, Honda CBR 250R and my own KTM Duke 390. Subscribe if you want to see that epic review. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. This is Rahul. Goodbye.